This week's lecture will cover the issue of confronting adversity in the form of anti-Asian violence. So hate crimes and anti-Asian violence. What is a hate crime? There are conflicting definitions, and we'll go into the different definitions as it pertains to speech. Is hate speech considered a hate crime? What about physical crime and crimes against persons, against the person's body, and also against property? How do these types of crimes relate to the definition of hate crime? The federal definition of hate crime is that a hate crime, as defined by the United States Congress, is a crime in which the defendant intentionally selects a victim, or in the case of a property crime, the property that is the object of the crime, because of the actual or perceived race, color, national origin, ethnicity, gender, disability, or sexual orientation of any person. The problem with this federal definition is that a crime has to occur and a motivation has to be proven with regards to race, color, national origin, ethnicity, gender, disability, or sexual orientation of any person. The Civil Rights Act of 1968 provides limited protection for individuals whose civil rights is being taken away from them. The photograph on the left is that of civil rights demonstrators sitting at a lunch counter protesting racial segregation policies of the lunch counter business, while at the same time they were being attacked by white supremacists who opposed their demands for segregation. The Civil Rights Act of 1968 makes it a federal crime for anyone who, quote, willingly injures, intimidates, or interferes with another person or attempts to do so by force because of the other person's race, color, religion, or national origin, because of the victim's attempt to engage in one of the 6 types of federally protected activities, such as attending school, patronizing a public place, facility, applying for employment, acting as a juror in a state court, or voting. Penalties for violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 vary from 1 year to life imprisonment to the death penalty, depending upon the degree of the crime committed. So being denied access to a public lunch counter would be a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Being blocked from entering a school or college would also be a violation of the Civil Rights Act. The Federal Hate Crime Statistics Act of 1990 further defined the definition in terms of what constitutes a hate crime. According to the 1990 definition provided under this Hate Crime Statistics Act, a hate crime is a violation of a criminal statute where the motivation is based upon the person's race, ethnicity, national origins, immigration status, or religion. The photo on the left is actually taken in 2015. It's a protest against increased incidents of anti-Muslim, anti-gay incidents of violence in the New York City area. So this federal definition here, again, there's some problems with it in terms of the fact that first, a crime has to occur, and second, a motivation has to be proven. In 1994, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act was passed to put more um, um, criminal penalties to hate crimes. Okay, the hate crime requirements again requires key violation of criminal statute, and motivation has to be proven based upon the victim's race, ethnicity, national origins, immigration status, and religion, as mentioned earlier. But the new addition here in terms of this 1994 act was that sentencing enhancements, adding years to a sentence if it's proven to be a hate crime, um, sentencing enhancements in terms of limiting parole, and also enhancement in terms of raising a misdemeanor to a felony if it's proven that hate crime was committed, okay, in addition to being just a regular crime. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009 was a further elaboration of the hate crime prevention's legislation. It included the addition of a crime that's committed where there's actual or perceived gender orientation, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability, and that the crime does not have to be a federally protected activity. This Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act also provided for federal funding for investigations, and it also began to analyze and and record statistics to track the hate crimes taking place. Matthew Shepard's murder was an anti-gay hate crime. It took place in Laramie, Wyoming in 1998. James Byrd Jr. Murder was an anti-black hate crime and also anti-disability hate crime. And this took place in Beaumont, Texas in 1998. So their deaths led to the passage of this Shepard-Byrd Act of 2009. So from their murders, we can see this movement to add sexual orientation, disability, and to this definition of hate crime. And it also, another thing that it did was it removed the requirement that it be a federally protected activity before it can be declared a hate crime. Hate crime statistics, 2015. There were 14,997 law enforcement agencies reporting, and in their numbers, 7,121 victims of hate crimes reported, and 5,818 of these were single bias incidents in terms of they were hate crimes that targeted individuals because of their association with a particular group. And then the breakdown of the categories in terms of bias included 59.2% because of race, ethnicity, ancestry, 19.7% due to religion, 17.7%, due to sexual orientation, 1.7%, gender identity, 1.2% disability, and 0.4% gender. In terms of hate crime statistics for the year 2015, crimes against persons and crimes against property and the race of the perpetrators. Crimes against persons, 4,482 total incidents, 41.3% involved intimidation, 37.8% simple assault, and 19.7% aggravated assault. Crimes against properties, there were 2,338 total incidents, 72.6% involved destruction, damage, and vandalism. The race of the perpetrators, out of 5,493 total incidents, 48.4% of the perpetrators were white, 24.3% black and African American, and 16.2% of the perpetrators were unknown. Reporting of hate crimes is important. The Los Angeles County Hate Crime Reporting report came out with 2014 to 2015 comparisons. Anti-Asian American Pacific Islander statistics increased by 200% during that 2-year period, and anti-Middle Eastern plus 400%, anti-Latino plus 69%, anti-Black plus 1%, and anti-White minus 8%. The National Asian Pacific American Legal Consortium offers a different definition of hate crime from the federal definition. And in their definition, a hate crime is any verbal or physical act that intimidates, threatens, or injures a person or a person's property because of membership in a targeted group. Okay, so you notice already here that it's any act that intimidates, verbal or physical act that intimidates, threatens, or injures a person or a person's property because of membership in a targeted group. So from this definition, we could see that there's some differences. One is that a crime does not have to occur. Intimidation or threat can be part of this. The thinking behind the NAP-ALC definition is that it's important to become proactive in the fight against hate. Okay, so that's where the controversy comes up. Okay. In terms of the message of hate crimes do send a political message. There's an intimidation focus in the message. Oftentimes, there's a public declaration or a narrative involved in the hate crime in terms of why a certain group or person is being targeted. Hate crimes themselves undermine democracy because of this intimidation. The purpose of the violence is to create fear, and overall this has the effect of undermining the idea or ideal of racial harmony. Hate crimes are crimes of passion, very intense. Normally, crime is 10% against individuals and 90% against property. Hate crimes are the reverse, 85% against individuals and 15% against property. Hospitalization is required in 30% of hate assaults, whereas it is only 7% for normal assault cases. What are the root causes of hate crimes? Uh, Here we have a list of 6 areas where we can look at root causes. One is war demonization. During times of war, there's intense propaganda, which involves dehumanization of the enemy, and also the byproduct of that is anyone who looks like the enemy. Second is anti-immigrant sentiments and nativism. This involves the thinking that resources are limited, jobs are limited, and immigrants are coming over and taking away jobs from the nativists. Okay, move-in violence, when a new group, in particular immigrants, moves into a settled neighborhood, they're viewed as outsiders, they're viewed as threats, taking away and competing for limited resources. 4, white supremacist ideology, the thinking that non-whites do not belong in this country. Economic competition is another root cause, usually having to do with foreign competition or the influx of foreign products that compete and oftentimes do better than local products. Geopolitical conflict, when there's an international crisis between countries and there's conflict, it's in the news, it's in the talk shows, and again, people who look like the competitors are often targeted. War demonization involves the targeting of those who look like the enemy. This may come from politicians who hope to win elected office or keep themselves in elected office by targeting the enemy, and the byproduct of this is that local people who look like the enemy also become targets. In the Vietnam War, uh, Asian Americans were often viewed as gooks and viewed and treated as the enemy. In in the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Tower attacks and the current war on terror, Muslims and South Asians bear the brunt of war demonization. Politicians' responses and governmental policies, such as the special registration program in 2002 to 2003, the calls for a Muslim registry in 2016, tend to legitimize the thinking that certain groups, such as Muslims and Arabs, don't deserve to reside in the United States. And this lays them open to becoming targets of hate crimes. Currently, we see a rise of Islamophobia. Islamophobia can be defined as fear and hatred for Muslims. Uh, this has led to the rise of hate crimes against Muslims and Middle Easterners. In 2001, in the aftermath of September 11th, there were 481 incidents of hate crimes against Muslims and Middle Easterners, with 80% concentrated in the first weeks after the September 11th attack on the World Trade Center. 27% of the incidents took place in schools, and 29% took place in workplaces. In 2015, there were 260 incidents against Muslims, which was actually an increase of 78%, and also higher increases against those perceived as Arabs. The incidents have increased in relation to terror attacks and also political campaign rhetoric with anti-Muslim content. On the left there is a September 17th, 2016, the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce, Florida, was burnt by an arsonist on a motorcycle over the weekend. Anti-immigrant sentiments and nativism. Even before the September 11th attacks, anti-immigrant sentiment has been very consistent. This has created a permissive climate against immigrants. Immigration issues have been used by politicians in an ongoing basis as a way to racially charge their campaigns. There have been numerous calls for anti-immigrant policies, calling for an end to programs such as schooling, welfare, social services, school lunches, healthcare access. Coupled with this are calls for immigrants to go home or commentary that they don't belong here. Okay. Much of this is related to the U.S. economic downturn, unemployment. Constant rhetoric is targeted against the undocumented, largely because they themselves don't have voting rights. Okay. So there's always been historical roots where those who consider themselves natives declare their right to expel those who are non-native. Move-in violence is related to this, and there was one very extreme case of move-in violence that took place in Stockton, California in 1989. This incident took place at Cleveland Elementary School, which was had a student population of 70% Southeast Asian American children. Edward Patrick Purdy, a young white man, had at one time attended this elementary school, and he was angry about the fact that this school was becoming more and more Asian. Okay. He fired from an AK-47. He fired into the schoolyard 105 rounds of ammunition. 5 Southeast Asian school children were killed and 31 children wounded. The context to all this was the rising Southeast Asian uh, population, big demographic changes in Stockton, California. Similarly, another incident took place in 2006 in Queens, New York, where Chinese and Korean businesses and residents were beginning to become more and more visible in the Queens, New York area. Four Chinese American men were attacked by two white males who were shouting racial slurs. This was related to the resentment of older white residents in the Queens, New York area to the large scale and visible entry of Asian immigrants. Opposition to Chinese and Korean businesses here also took the form of opposition to foreign language signs by the older white residents. All of this provided a backdrop where eventually some type of violence would take place. Opposition to newcomers also took place in San Francisco, California, in the housing development projects. In 2004, there was a consent decree signed with by the San Francisco housing project. There was a lawsuit that was filed on behalf of 14 Arab families who filed suit about physical property and verbal assaults by the largely African American public housing development. Uh, a lot of um, the resentment against them was also related to post 9/11 sentiments, in addition to the fact that these were newcomers moving in and competing for limited housing resources. There was a settlement in this case of $200,000 paid out by the housing authority, as well as federal monitoring of the conditions in the housing projects with regards to protection and safety of the Arab families. Earlier, 1987, Monterey Park, California, there were also incidents of threats and intimidation with regards to the large scale moving in of Taiwanese, um, Hong Kong people, and other Asian immigrants into the largely white Monterey Park um, um, community. During the city council elections, there was also anti-Asian and anti-Latino immigrant rhetoric that was being put forward that exacerbated the conflict in Monterey Park. Numerous hate incidents can also be connected with the rise and spread of white supremacist ideology. Uh, this spread has actually accelerated because of the use of online social media. Online communities are often linked with hate groups. Actually, you could say that white supremacist ideology um, can be spread through not just through online uh, communities, but also through literature, written literature, although online is one of the quickest um, ways in which this ideology can um, uh, build up on. There's a link. Studies have shown that there's a link between broadband use and as well as the spread of white supremacist ideology. 1999 to 2000, there were a number of shooting sprees all across the country involving white supremacist ideology. In Sacramento, California, 3 Jewish synagogues were firebombed. Pittsburgh, California, a white supremacist attacked African Americans and Asian Americans. In Los Angeles, California, a white supremacist attacked a Jewish daycare center and killed postal worker Joseph Ileto. In terms of the ideology of the shooters in some of these incidents, Richard Baumhammer in 2000 was charged for the Pittsburgh shooting spree, which killed 3 Asian Americans, 1 African American, and 1 Jewish woman. It was found that he was motivated by white supremacist ideology. He was operating a website that was opposed to non-white immigration, and he was also the author of a document titled The Free Market Party, dedicated to the concerns of European Americans. The document called for lower taxes, an end to non-white immigration, end to affirmative action, reduce foreign aid, and proposed making English the official language. In 1999, Buford Farrell, a white supremacist with ties to the Aryan nations and the order, sprayed 70 bullets into a Jewish community center and murdered, as mentioned earlier, Filipino-American postal worker Joseph Ileto because he looked Asian or Hispanic. 10 years afterwards, Buford Farrell wrote about some changes that he was going through. Quote, "About 5 years ago, I threw away my racist books, literature, etc., and took up a new leaf. I now publicly renounce all bias towards anyone based on race, creed, color, sexual orientation. My mind was filled with sickness, and unfortunately, I acted on it. I can't change the past, but I can damn sure change the future, and my future will never include neo-Nazi activity again. That's all I can do." But white supremacist ideology continues, and actually the flames of white supremacy are spread by individuals running for office, individuals who are in office, and and then this becomes a justification by those who ascribe to or have an affinity to white supremacy. 2017, we have witnessed an increased use of the internet to promote white supremacist ideology. There's plenty of hate related websites from the alt-right all the way to the far right. And white supremacy is emboldened by politicians in their campaign rhetoric. Hate sites are used to defame and intimidate the opposition, but they're also used as a recruiting and organizing tool to actually build a white supremacist movement. They provide advocacy for white supremacist causes. They provide reasoning in terms of ideological tools to influence individuals, such as Baumhammer and Buford Farrell. The 2012 Oak Creek, Wisconsin shooting is a prime example also. In 2012, Oak Creek, Wisconsin, the Sikh Gurdwara, or the Sikh temple, there was a shooting there. The perpetrator was a white supremacist, Wade Michael Page, who shot and killed 6, and he wounded 4 individuals during preparations for Langar, which was a communal meal that was open to members of the Sikh temple, and also for open for the wider community. Page himself was found to be, in terms of his motivation, he was a member of the Hammerskins, which was a white supremacist band. He was part of the white supremacist music scene. So one big common thread with white supremacist violence is the fact that it's promoted on the internet, and on the internet itself is used as an organizing tool for its promotion. And then at the time that I'm putting together this lecture, 2017, Portland, Oregon, Jeremy Christian, a known white supremacist, was aggressively harassing 2 young Muslim girls, teenagers, aboard the light rail transit system. He began yelling, Muslims, criminals, as the girls boarded. He said, "Get off the bus and get out of the country because you don't pay taxes here." Three passengers tried to intervene, and 2 were slashed to death, with a 3rd wounded but survived. On the top here are pictures memorializing the passengers who died trying to stop the harassment. And on the bottom are 2 photos of Jeremy Christian, who was a known white supremacist. It has him attending a right-wing free speech rally in Portland, Oregon. Economic competition, Japan bashing. You could also add on economic competition, and China bashing is also related. Much rhetoric against foreign competition, especially by American manufacturers and by American politicians when the economy is not doing so well. Okay? This has led to racial lumping in terms of hate violence against Asian Americans because of the fact that they look like the foreign competition. And in the case of Vincent Chin, a Chinese American man living in Detroit, he was murdered by 2 auto workers who were laid off or unemployed because of this alleged foreign competition. The photo there on the left is Vincent Chin's mother, Vincent Chin's fiance, and the name of the committee that organized to demand justice for Vincent Chin's murder in 1982 was the American Citizens for Justice, okay, for Vincent Chin. Vincent Chin's murder in 1982 was took place during the context of intense economic competition with Japan, and there was plenty of Japan bashing during that time. Japan bashing meaning bashing Japan because of its able to sell more cars, bashing Japan because unemployment resulted from the sale of more Japanese cars sold. But at issue here was whether or not race or racism was at the heart of the murder. Uh, Moreover, whether racism even affected Asian Americans at all. Okay. Um, the chronology, the background. Um, well, one big part of the background is this decline in American auto, um, gas guzzling U.S. cars uh, versus fuel efficient Japanese cars. Japanese auto wins. There's a Buy America campaign promoted by the United Auto Workers and also the automakers, Chrysler Corporation. Uh, Chrysler chair Lee Iacocca uh, joked about dropping a nuclear bomb on Japan, and politicians were also saying similar. So that's the background. The incident took place in a bar where Vincent Chin was celebrating his bachelor's night. The next day he was to be married. But in this bar, there was an incident that took place between Vincent Chin and Ronald Ebbins, who was drinking with his stepson Michael Nitz. What happened was uh, Vincent got in an argument with Ronald Ebbins. Ronald Ebbins had commented that it's because of UMFs that we are out of work. A fight breaks out. The fight is broken up. Vincent Chin um, is outside, um, blocks away. Ronald Ebbins, Michael Nitz track him down. They find him. They beat him with a baseball bat. His brains are spilled all over the street, and he dies. Um, they plead guilty to uh, manslaughter, and they're given a very light sentence: 3 years probation and $3,780 fine. Um, there's anger over this. Vincent Chin's attorneys file for a civil rights suit in 1984. Ebbins himself is found guilty and sentenced to 25 years. The son Nitz is acquitted. In 1987, there's an appeal by Ebbins, and Ebbins is also acquitted and set free. In 1987, a civil suit is filed by Vincent's mother for loss of life of her son, and there's a settlement for $1.5 million, but Ebbins refused to pay a cent. The mother then returns to China after 30 years in the United States. So one big part of the debate is do Asian Americans suffer from racially motivated hate crimes? The mother, Lily Chin, definitely felt strongly that there was an injustice, and that she was very focused on demanding justice for what had happened to her son, and she argued that it was racially motivated murder. So who was it that killed Vincent Chin then? Well, you could say that there were the actual individuals who were involved in his killing. The um, Ron Ebbins and his son Michael Nitz. Michael Nitz held Vincent Chin while Evans, the father, swung the baseball bat at his head. But there's another part to the story about Vincent Chin, and this has to do with the whole atmosphere of violence that was created by the car bashing events, the statements by Chrysler Chair Lee Iacocca, um, and also Congressman John Dingell uh, referred to Japanese idol as those little men. So all these things help contribute to this atmosphere of um, anger and violence, um, not just against Japan, but um, against Asian Americans. Also, part of this was Judge Kaufman, in terms of the two men, the father and the stepson, pleading guilty um, to the assault charges. And Judge Kaufman, in issuing such a light sentence, $3,780 fine and 3 years probation, uh, made a statement um, that the reason why he gave such a sentence was because these aren't the kind of men you send to jail. So the last court hearing had to do with the 1987 civil suit for loss of life. Lily Chin filed suit um, for loss of personal assistance by her son. Uh, the 1.5 million settlement was never paid. She returns to China after 40 years, returns back to the United States in 2002 for cancer treatment, and she passes away in the United States. Vincent Chin's death was definitely a different time, but it did harken back to the days where anti Asian violence was commonplace. The drawing on the left is a scene from the sacking of L.A. Chinatown. There was an incident in 1871 where 15 Chinese residents were hung and killed from trees in this anti-Chinese riot. But Vincent Chin's death was a different time. Uh, it was during the post-civil rights era. Supposedly, um, equality was reached for everyone. Asian exclusion had ended. Um, Asian American movement and other civil rights related movements were in a declining period. Asian Americans were now considered the thinking was that Asian Americans were now the model minority for other minorities. This made it difficult for the American Citizens for Justice for Vincent Chin. It was they had to go through a period of much discussion uh, before they could name it racism. Racism at that time was viewed largely as something that happened only between African Americans and the white community. In the Vincent Chin case, uh, put it on the map. Yes, definitely, Vincent Chin's murder was due to white racism. So that was um, 82 was Vincent Chin was murdered, and in 1989, another incident that happened where um, a young man in his early 20s, um, Ming Hai Jim Liu, who was murdered in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a war-related hate crime. References were made by the assailants, two brothers, Robert and Lloyd Pichet, who made references to the fact that they had brothers who were lost in the Vietnam War. Jim Liu was Chinese American, not Vietnamese American, but his murder was related to the Vietnam War, a case of mistaken um, identity. He was with a group of six other Asian Americans, mostly Vietnamese Americans, who were minding their own business, shooting pool in a pool hall in Raleigh, North Carolina, when they were challenged by racist comments by the two brothers. Uh, they were actually challenged to a game of pool, which they refused. They were called numerous names, such as on the left, slanty-eyed gooks, black pajamas, rice eaters, chinks, names called out to Jim Liu and his friends when they refused to play pool for money at the Raleigh, North Carolina bar. Uh, what happened was uh, the the two brothers were ejected from the pool hall for being aggressive and intimidating. They waited outside, and then when Jim Liu and his friends exited the pool hall, they were attacked, uh, and they had guns pointed at them. Jim Liu was hit on the head with the butt of a pistol. He fell, and when he fell, there was a broken beer bottle on the floor, which punctured his head when he fell, and he died shortly after. Robert Pichet received 37 years, of which he served 10 years. Lloyd Pichet received only 6 months because he was not the one that was he was not the main perpetrator. Asian American activism forced a civil rights trial, and Lloyd was sentenced to 6 years for violation of Jim Liu's civil rights, which resulted in death. Okay. Uh, the pool hall was a publicly protected um, location, and Jim Liu and his friends were minding their own business in this publicly protected location, and the violation of the civil rights took place in this location, with death resulting. Lessons from Vincent Chin and also Jim Liu's murder. Asian Americans are still second-class citizens. There was a very strong refusal of the court system in both cases to recognize racism against Asian Americans, and it was up to the Asian American community in both cases to raise the issue of racism and hate violence. So what can we conclude from all this? What can be done about hate crimes as they seem to be on the rise? How can we prevent them from occurring and recurring? This involves advocacy, resistance, publicity with regards to the community does need to speak out when they do happen. It's important to identify them as hate crimes because authorities and institutions tend to not be able to do that, and it's up to the community to and also allies and supporters to identify hate crimes. There's definitely a need to report hate crimes because if they're underreported, then people don't know the extent of hate crimes. Uh, there's organizations such as Asian Americans for Advancing Justice. AAJA that actually have websites where individuals can report hate crimes so that the entire community can understand its occurrence, and as well as finding ways to document as well as um, isolate the situation. The website is titled standagainsthatred.org.